Hello, my friend. Tonight, we dive into a world of power and ambition, where queens were far from mere figurehead. They were warriors, manipulators, and rulers. The Middle Ages, a time of wars, kings, and knights, also birthed some of the most fascinating and daring queens history has ever seen. Their lives, often full of intrigue, scandal, and revolution, were not what you might expect from the often romanticized view of the past. Get ready to meet these powerful women, whose stories are as twisted as they are inspiring. But, be warned, you probably won't survive the emotional roller coaster ahead. These queens were not shy about making their mark, and sometimes the consequences were both catastrophic and transformative. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to post your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Middle Ages was a time when women were often seen as figures of beauty or motherhood. But beneath those expectations, some queens dared to be something more. They wielded power with a combination of grace, intelligence, and ruthlessness that set them apart from their male counterparts. These queens didn't just sit in their chambers waiting for history to unfold. No, they took action. Some led armies, some manipulated entire kingdoms, and others used their position to change the fate of nations. In an era dominated by men, these women had to break every rule in the book to get what they wanted. Whether through brilliant political strategies, scandalous relationships, or outright betrayal, their actions were anything but conventional. They fought for power, built empires, and sometimes left a trail of destruction in their wake. They were unforgettable, and their stories are as bold as the times they lived in. Tonight, we begin with one of the most remarkable and controversial queens of the Middle Ages, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Her life was full of ambition, power struggles, and scandalous decisions that shook the foundations of Europe. From a young woman caught in a mismatched marriage to becoming the Queen of England, Eleanor's story is as complex and fascinating as the world she navigated. Eleanor was born into one of the wealthiest and most influential regions of France, Aquitaine, in 1122. Imagine it, a vast, powerful duchy that controlled much of southern France. Her birth was an auspicious one, not only because of her noble lineage, but because she inherited the title of Duchess. Eleanor didn't just inherit lands, she inherited power, and it was a power that would shape Europe for decades to come. At the age of 15, Eleanor's life took a fateful turn when she married King Louis VII of France. It seemed like a fairy tale for a young woman from the south of France to marry the King of France, but it didn't take long for her to realize that this was no fairy tale. Louis, while pious and well-meaning, lacked the ambition and drive that Eleanor had in spades. Their marriage quickly became strained. Louis was more focused on the spiritual and religious aspects of his rule, leaving little room for Eleanor's political ambitions. Still, Eleanor wasn't content to be sidelined. She accompanied Louis on the disastrous Second Crusade, where her intelligence and leadership began to shine, albeit not in the way the crusade organizers had hoped. The venture was a failure, and the tensions in Eleanor and Louis's marriage only grew. Soon, Eleanor began to feel suffocated in a relationship where her talents were ignored and her ambitions stifled. In 1152, just 8 years after their marriage, Eleanor's chance for freedom came. The marriage was annulled, and Eleanor was free to chart her own course. 2 months later, Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet, who would later become Henry II of England. You could say this was a marriage made not in heaven, but in political strategy. Eleanor didn't just marry a king, she married a man who shared her ambition. The union between Eleanor and Henry wasn't one of mere convenience, it was a power move. By marrying Henry, Eleanor became not just a queen, but a key player in English and French politics. But here's where things get even more complicated. As Queen of England, Eleanor didn't just sit by while Henry ruled. She took an active role in governance, serving as a co-regent. Together, They ruled over an empire that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees. But of course, nothing is ever that simple, and their reign was marked by constant power struggles not just between them, but also involving their sons, especially Richard the Lionheart and John. You see, Eleanor had many children, but her relationship with her sons was fraught with complications. Henry, in his effort to control the English throne, began to favour Richard as his successor, sidelining John, who grew resentful and ambitious. Eleanor, ever the strategist, sided with Richard and John in a rebellion against their father. This, of course, did not go over well with Henry, and Eleanor was thrown into prison for her involvement in the plot. But Eleanor, like any formidable queen, was not one to fade into the background. After 15 years of imprisonment, she was finally released, though by then her role in the political landscape had shifted. No longer was she at the forefront of English politics, but she remained a powerful and influential figure, especially in the cultural and artistic spheres. As a patron of the arts, Eleanor encouraged the development of courtly love and chivalric ideals. She surrounded herself with poets, musicians, and artists who would go on to shape the culture of the time. Her influence on medieval literature and courtly customs was profound. Through her patronage, Eleanor helped to spread the ideals of chivalry and courtly love, which would remain staples of European culture for centuries to come. But don't be fooled. Eleanor was no mere figurehead. She still had the sharp political mind that had helped her rise to power in the first place. Even as she aged, Eleanor continued to manage her lands and maintain influence over her sons, ensuring that her legacy would not be forgotten. Her death in 1204 marked the end of an era, but by then, she had already cemented her place as one of the most influential women in European history. Historians still argue whether Eleanor's power was a result of her marriages or if she had the innate ability to wield influence on her own. Was she a political mastermind, or did she merely know how to use the system to her advantage? Perhaps it doesn't matter. What does matter is the impact she had on her world and the legacy she left behind. As you drift off to sleep tonight, think of Eleanor's boldness, her courage, and the way she shaped the world around her. She was a queen who lived life on her own terms, no matter the consequences. Matilda of England, a struggle for the crown. Matilda of England, often overshadowed by the men who came after her, was one of the most fascinating and tragic figures in medieval history. Known as Empress Matilda, her struggle to claim the English throne is one of the most poignant tales of ambition, betrayal, and relentless determination. Born into a time of immense political instability, Matilda was the daughter of King Henry I of England, and as the firstborn child, she was the rightful heir to the throne. Yet, despite her royal bloodline, her journey to power was anything but smooth. Her story begins in 1102, when she was married off to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry V, making her Empress of the Holy Roman Empire. A powerful position indeed, but one that took her far from England. After Henry V's sudden death in 1125, Matilda found herself without a title or a throne, returning to England with little to hold on to except her claim to the throne. Upon the death of her father, Henry I, in 1135, Matilda was supposed to ascend to the throne of England as the first female monarch. However, the throne was instead claimed by her cousin, Stephen of Blois, who was supported by a significant portion of the nobility. The political landscape of England was complicated, and Stephen's coronation marked the beginning of one of the most destructive civil wars in English history, known as the Anarchy. Stephen was not the only obstacle Matilda faced. Her own gender was a significant disadvantage in a time when women were largely excluded from holding power, and her claim to the throne was constantly undermined by powerful men who didn't believe a woman was fit to rule. Yet, Matilda was unyielding. She demanded recognition as the rightful Queen of England, and her determination was matched only by the chaos that ensued in her wake. Matilda's struggle for power was defined by a series of sieges, battles, and political alliances. With the help of her half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, and her uncle David I of Scotland, Matilda gathered an army to challenge Stephen for control of the throne. The conflict between the two rivals was brutal and bloody, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage for years. At one point, Matilda even captured Stephen, briefly imprisoning him and coming dangerously close to taking the throne by force. Yet, despite these victories, her cause faltered. In 1148, Matilda was forced to abandon her attempt to claim the throne and return to France, defeated but not broken. Her departure left Stephen with a tenuous grip on power, but the civil war raged on, leaving England in a state of constant turmoil. Despite her defeat, Matilda's legacy is far from one of failure. While she never officially ruled as queen, her son, Henry II, would go on to become one of England's greatest monarchs. Through her determination and perseverance, Matilda set the stage for her son's rise to power, ensuring that her bloodline would ultimately hold the throne. Henry II's reign would establish the Plantagenet dynasty, which would rule England for over 300 years. Historians still debate what might have happened had Matilda ascended to the throne during her lifetime. Could she have brought stability to England? Would her reign have been as successful as her son's? One thing is certain. Matilda's story is a testament to the fierce ambition of a woman who refused to be denied, even in an age where women were often treated as political pawns rather than active participants in the governance of their kingdoms. Matilda's failure to claim the throne didn't diminish her place in history. She was a woman who fought fiercely for her birthright and, in doing so, changed the course of English history. Though her reign never materialized, Matilda's legacy is firmly established through the success of her son Henry II and the enduring Plantagenet dynasty. Today, Matilda of England is remembered as a warrior queen, a woman whose ambition and resilience were far ahead of her time. In an era where women were expected to be passive figures, Matilda fought tirelessly for her rightful place on the throne. While history may have denied her the crown, Matilda's story proves that true power often comes not from the throne itself, but from the tenacity to fight for it. As you prepare to drift off to sleep tonight, remember Matilda's story, a woman who refused to accept defeat, who fought not for glory or riches, but for the simple right to rule. She reminds us that sometimes the greatest battles aren't won with swords, but with the will to keep going, no matter the odds. Queen Isabella of France, the fatal beauty. Isabella of France, often referred to as the she-wolf of France, is one of the most dramatic and infamous queens in medieval history. Her story is one of manipulation, betrayal, and power struggles, yet it also speaks to the immense influence a queen could wield during a time when the political landscape was overwhelmingly controlled by men. Born in 1295 to King Philip IV of France and Queen Joan I of Navarre, Isabella was a royal from birth, groomed for greatness. But it wasn't her royal blood alone that made her infamous. It was her willingness to take bold action when faced with the abuse of power. Isabella's marriage to King Edward II of England in 1308 was arranged as part of a political alliance between England and France, aimed at stabilizing relations between the two kingdoms. Edward II, however, was far from the powerful king Isabella had expected. His reign was marked by weakness, indecision, and an overwhelming dependence on a group of favourites, most notably Piers Gaveston and Hugh Despenser, whose influence over the king drove much of the English court's disdain. Edward's preference for his favourites over his queen and the noble class ignited a sense of dissatisfaction that would eventually explode into a civil conflict. At first, Isabella was patient, enduring her husband's neglect and his questionable relationships. But as years went by, the cracks in their marriage deepened. Isabella, however, was not one to remain passive. Over time, she cultivated her own network of allies within England, gathering support from discontented nobles who were frustrated with Edward's rule. Her patience turned into a carefully calculated move for power when she travelled to France in 1325, ostensibly to negotiate with her brother, King Charles IV, over English territories. During this time, she began an affair with Roger Mortimer, a powerful English nobleman who shared her desire to see Edward II removed from the throne. This marked the beginning of Isabella's plot to overthrow her husband. In 1326, Isabella and Mortimer returned to England with an army, ostensibly to negotiate peace. However, once they arrived, Isabella's forces quickly turned against Edward II, forcing him to abdicate the throne in favour of his young son Edward III. The overthrow was swift and decisive, but the aftermath was not as smooth as Isabella had hoped. Edward II was imprisoned, and shortly thereafter, rumours began circulating about the nature of his death. Some claimed he had been murdered, while others suggested that he had died of natural causes. The truth remains shrouded in mystery, but one thing is certain: Isabella and Mortimer had secured the throne for her son. Isabella, now the Queen Mother, became the de facto ruler of England, while Mortimer took control of the government. Isabella's power, however, was short-lived. Her relationship with Mortimer deteriorated, and in 1330, her son, Edward III, having come of age, turned against his mother and Mortimer, executing Mortimer and taking full control of the crown. Isabella's fall from power was both sudden and humiliating. Though she remained alive for many years after her son's coup, she never regained the influence she had once held. The once mighty queen who had overthrown her husband and taken control of England was now a mere figurehead, living out her days in relative obscurity. Historians still debate the true nature of Isabella's actions. Was she a woman driven by personal ambition, seeking power and control, or was she simply a woman trapped in a marriage to a weak and ineffective king, fighting for the future of her son and the kingdom? Some view her as a political mastermind, while others see her as a tragic figure caught in the throes of power struggles that were far beyond her control. Regardless of how she is remembered, Isabella's legacy is undeniably one of boldness, manipulation, and political savvy. Isabella's life is a reminder that queens in the Middle Ages were not merely passive figures of royalty. They were active participants in the political and social life of their kingdoms. They had the power to manipulate, control, and even overthrow monarchs. Isabella's dramatic rise to power and her eventual downfall reveal the harsh realities of medieval politics, where loyalty was fleeting and betrayal was often the price of survival. As you close your eyes tonight, think of Isabella, her beauty, her cunning, and her ambitious pursuit of power. She was a queen who didn't accept the limitations placed upon her. Instead, she carved out her own path, no matter the cost. Her story reminds us that even in the most constrained circumstances, power is often found through determination, alliances, and sometimes betrayal. Catherine de' Medici, the intriguer. Catherine de' Medici was a woman whose intelligence, ambition, and ruthless cunning left a mark on history that few can match. Born into the powerful Medici family of Florence in 1519, Catherine's life was one of intrigue, political maneuvering, and the constant pursuit of power. She would rise to become the Queen Consort of France, and ultimately, the mother of 3 French kings. But her legacy is often defined less by the title she held and more by her ability to manipulate the corridors of power, shaping the fate of France through a mixture of diplomacy, espionage, and strategic marriages. Catherine's early life was marked by tragedy. Orphaned at the age of 6, she was raised in the courts of Florence and Rome, far removed from the wealth and power of her birth family. In 1533, she was married to Henry, the future King Henry II of France, in a political alliance designed to strengthen the ties between France and the Medici family. At the time of their marriage, Catherine was only 14, and the young couple's relationship was far from passionate. Henry, already infatuated with his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, barely paid Catherine any attention. Nonetheless, Catherine persevered, understanding that her real power would not come from her husband's affections, but from her own political maneuvering. When Henry ascended the throne in 1547, Catherine became Queen Consort, but her role was largely symbolic. Despite being married to the king, She was often sidelined by Henry's affection for Diane and the court's intrigue surrounding their relationship, but Catherine knew better than to show weakness. Instead of confronting the situation head-on, she quietly built her own network of supporters and allies within the French court, biding her time until she could claim the influence she was due. The turning point in Catherine's life came with Henry's sudden death in 1559. Henry's death left Catherine as the mother of 3 young sons, who would succeed him on the French throne in quick succession. At this moment, Catherine's true political genius began to emerge. With her sons Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III on the throne, Catherine became the de facto ruler of France. Though officially she was just a regent, Catherine's reign as regent was marked by one of the most turbulent periods in French history, the Wars of Religion. The country was deeply divided between Catholics and Huguenots, French Protestants, and Catherine, ever the pragmatist, sought to maintain stability at any cost. She initially attempted to act as a mediator, seeking a middle ground between the two factions, but as the situation grew more volatile, her methods became increasingly ruthless. In 1572, Catherine's political machinations reached their darkest point with the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Under her influence, a bloody wave of violence was unleashed against the Huguenots, who were massacred by the thousands. Though the massacre was officially a response to the attempted assassination of the Huguenot leader Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, many historians argue that Catherine used the event as a strategic move to eliminate her political enemies and consolidate her power. The massacre cemented her reputation as a woman willing to go to any lengths to secure her family's throne and maintain her grip on power. Despite her ruthlessness, Catherine was also a patron of the arts and a shrewd diplomat. She worked tirelessly to secure advantageous marriages for her children, cementing alliances with foreign powers. Her political maneuvering helped solidify the position of the Bourbon family in France, which would go on to rule France for centuries. Historians still debate whether Catherine was a true schemer or a woman caught in the complex politics of her time. Was she a calculating mastermind, manipulating events from the shadows, or was she simply doing what was necessary to protect her sons and the French monarchy? Some view her as a villain, while others see her as a woman who did what she had to do to survive in a male-dominated world. What is clear is that Catherine de' Medici's political legacy is marked by her ability to navigate the most dangerous waters of 16th-century European politics with unparalleled skill. Catherine's power waned in the later years of her life, as her sons grew more independent and her influence over the French court began to diminish. However, her impact on French politics and the monarchy remained significant, and she continued to play a key role in French affairs until her death in 1589. As you drift off to sleep tonight, think of Catherine, her ambition, her cunning, and her unyielding pursuit of power. Though she may not have been the most beloved queen, her legacy as one of the most politically astute women in history cannot be denied. Catherine de' Medici proves that sometimes power doesn't come from the throne itself, it comes from the shadows, from the quiet manipulation of events, and from the willingness to do whatever it takes to survive and thrive. Margaret of Anjou, the warrior queen. Margaret of Anjou was no stranger to the battlefield. Born in 1430, the daughter of King René of Anjou, Margaret's early life was marked by the turbulence of war and political intrigue. She was destined for a life of struggle, but she would rise above the challenges to become one of the most formidable queens in English history. Margaret's story is one of fierce loyalty, political ambition, and extraordinary perseverance, as she fought not only for her husband's throne, but also for the survival of her family's legacy. In 1445, at the age of 15, Margaret was married to Henry VI of England, a union that seemed to promise peace between England and France. At the time, Henry VI was a weak and indecisive king, and England was in the midst of the tumultuous period known as the Wars of the Roses, a civil war between the houses of Lancaster and York, both vying for control of the English throne. Margaret's marriage to Henry did little to calm the situation. Rather, It thrust her into the heart of the political chaos that gripped the kingdom. While Henry was consumed by his bouts of mental illness and unable to effectively rule, Margaret took it upon herself to lead the Lancastrian faction. She quickly became a key figure in the Wars of the Roses, rallying support for her husband and his claim to the throne. Though the Yorkists, led by Edward IV, appeared to have the upper hand for much of the conflict, Margaret's tenacity and strategic mind made her a force to be reckoned with. Margaret was not just a queen consort. She was a queen in her own right, leading armies into battle and managing political alliances. Her determination to defend her husband's throne and protect her son, the future Edward V, from the dangers of the Yorkist forces was unwavering. But despite her efforts, the tide of the war began to turn against her. In 1461, after a devastating defeat at the Battle of Towton, Margaret's forces were shattered and she was forced to retreat. However, Margaret was far from defeated. Over the next several years, she led a series of campaigns to reclaim her husband's throne, often relying on alliances with France and other European powers. Margaret's resilience in the face of defeat is one of the defining characteristics of her reign. Even after the death of her husband in 1471, she continued to fight for the restoration of her son's claim to the throne, though she ultimately failed to secure his position. Her final defeat came in 1475, when she was captured by the Yorkist forces and held prisoner for several years. Margaret spent the remaining years of her life in exile in France, but her legacy as a warrior queen was secured. She may have lost the war, but she had fought fiercely for her family's survival and for the throne that she believed was rightfully hers. Historians still debate Margaret's role in the Wars of the Roses. Was she a capable ruler, or was she simply a woman caught in the machinations of a power-hungry court? Some view her as a tragic figure, a queen who fought valiantly to protect her son's inheritance, only to see it slip from her grasp. Others see her as a political mastermind, whose leadership and resilience helped to define the Lancastrian cause. Whatever the case, Margaret of Anjou's legacy as a warrior queen and a fierce protector of her family is undeniable. Her story serves as a reminder that the role of a queen was not always one of passive beauty and diplomacy. Margaret was not content to sit quietly by her husband's side. She was a leader in her own right, willing to take up arms to defend her throne and her family. Her determination to fight, even in the face of overwhelming odds, set her apart from many of her contemporaries and cemented her place in history as one of the most formidable queens of the Middle Ages. As you lie in bed tonight, think of Margaret, her courage, her strength, and her unrelenting will to protect those she loved. Though she was ultimately defeated, Margaret of Anjou's story is one of resilience and devotion, a reminder that true leadership often comes in the most unexpected forms. Empress Theodora, from prostitute to empress. Empress Theodora of Byzantium is one of history's most extraordinary figures, embodying the true meaning of transformation. Her rise from humble and controversial beginnings to becoming one of the most powerful women in the ancient world is a tale of ambition, resilience, and unparalleled political savvy. Theodora, who lived in the 6th century, was not born into wealth or privilege. She was the daughter of a bear trainer and a woman of low social standing. But through sheer determination and intelligence, she would ascend from the streets of Constantinople to the imperial throne, shaping the future of the Byzantine Empire. Theodora's early life was far from royal. She began her career as an actress. Many sources claim she was also involved in the more controversial professions of her time, including prostitution. Her beauty, charisma, and sharp mind, however, made her an incredibly successful and sought-after woman in the imperial capital. By the time she was in her early 20s, she had already caught the eye of Justinian, the future emperor of Byzantium, who was so taken with her that he eventually married her, despite the considerable social gap between them. In a time when a woman's position in society was largely determined by her family and marriage, Theodora's rise was nothing short of scandalous. Many in the court and the elite of Constantinople disapproved of her background, and there were even voices that argued Justinian's marriage to her was politically unwise. However, Theodora's intelligence and political instincts quickly proved her doubters wrong. When Justinian became emperor in 527, Theodora was crowned as empress, and her influence over the empire grew steadily. She was not simply a ceremonial figure. Theodora wielded immense power and was often regarded as the co-ruler of the empire. Together with her husband, she enacted significant reforms, particularly in the realm of women's rights. One of her most notable achievements was her support for laws that protected women from forced prostitution and gave them more legal rights. She also played a major role in dealing with religious and political conflicts within the empire, making decisions that would leave a lasting impact on Byzantium. Theodora's political acumen was evident during one of the most critical moments in her reign, the Nika riots of 532. The riots, which began as a simple factional dispute among the chariot racing fans of Constantinople, quickly spiraled into a full-scale rebellion against Justinian's rule. The city was on the verge of collapse, and the emperor's advisors urged him to flee. However, it was Theodora who encouraged her husband to stay and fight, famously declaring that purple is the noblest burial shroud, referring to the color of imperial robes. With her support, Justinian mustered his forces and decisively crushed the rebellion, saving his throne and solidifying Theodora's position as his most trusted advisor. Despite her earlier life in the public eye, Theodora's role in the court was never purely symbolic. Her influence reached far beyond the palace, as she became an integral part of the decision-making process and worked tirelessly to secure the empire's future. She was known for her formidable intelligence, decisiveness, and unwavering commitment to Justinian's vision for the empire. Under her guidance, the Byzantine Empire experienced a renaissance in art, architecture, and law, most famously resulting in the construction of the Hagia Sophia. Yet, as with many powerful women, Theodora's legacy is not without controversy. Her earlier life as an actress and her relationship with Justinian were subjects of gossip and scandal throughout her reign, and some historians have cast doubt on her character due to the nature of her past. But in truth, Theodora was a woman who rose above these early challenges and used her position to bring about significant change in her empire. Historians still debate how much influence Theodora had in the governance of the Byzantine Empire compared to her husband. While Justinian is often remembered for his military campaigns and legal reforms, Theodora's behind-the-scenes work was just as crucial. Many of the social reforms she championed, such as the rights of women and the expansion of the legal system, were groundbreaking for their time. As you drift off to sleep tonight, think of Theodora, the woman who defied the odds and rose from obscurity to become one of the most powerful women in history. A woman who didn't let her past define her, but instead shaped the future of an empire. Her legacy serves as a reminder that strength is not just about where you start, but about the resilience to rise, no matter the obstacles. Queen Blanche of Castile, A Mother's Revenge. Queen Blanche of Castile's story is a powerful testament to the lengths a mother will go to protect her child and to preserve her family's legacy. Born into the royal family of Castile in 1188, Blanche was a woman of formidable intelligence and ambition, yet her journey to the throne was anything but smooth. Her life would be defined not only by her royal status, but by the battles she fought for her son's right to rule and for the protection of her kingdom. In 1200, Blanche married King Louis VIII of France, a union that was both politically advantageous and personally complex. While her marriage brought her closer to the French throne, it also placed her in a precarious position. Louis VIII's reign was tumultuous, marked by wars and domestic unrest. Shortly after the birth of their son, Louis IX, later Saint Louis, Blanche was thrust into a world of political maneuvering and courtly intrigues that would test her mettle. When her husband died in 1226, Blanche was left with a young son and an unstable kingdom. Louis IX, only 12 years old at the time of his father's death, was too young to rule effectively on his own. Blanche took on the role of regent, and her first challenge was to ensure the stability of France. Her reign as regent would be marked by political crises, foreign threats, and the constant challenge of balancing power between her son's future reign and the ambitions of the French nobility. Blanche's greatest obstacle came from within her own court. Many of the French nobles were eager to regain their power and control, and they were not pleased with a woman holding the reins of the kingdom. Some nobles even sought to undermine her authority, hoping to take advantage of Louis IX's youth. But Blanche was no passive figure. She had a deep understanding of political strategy, and she played the nobility with a masterful hand. She used a combination of diplomacy, alliances, and military force to keep her enemies in check, never allowing them to get too close to the throne. Her greatest moment of power came when she faced the rebellious nobles who sought to undermine her son's rule. As Louis IX grew older, he began to assert his independence, but Blanche's role as regent was far from over. She fiercely protected his position, and when a rebellion broke out against him, she showed her ruthlessness in defending her family's claim. Blanche's ability to put down rebellions and consolidate power for her son earned her the respect of her enemies and allies alike. One of the most defining moments of her reign came when she managed to secure Louis IX's position despite external threats. The French monarchy had to face various invasions and external pressures, most notably from England and the Holy Roman Empire. Yet, Blanche skillfully navigated these challenges, leveraging diplomacy and marriage alliances to protect her son's future. She made strategic alliances with neighboring kingdoms, ensuring that Louis IX would inherit a strong and stable throne when he finally came of age. As Louis grew older and became more involved in the affairs of the kingdom, Blanche gradually withdrew from the political spotlight. However, her influence remained strong, and her role in shaping his reign cannot be overstated. Louis IX would later be canonized as a saint, and much of his piety, sense of justice, and commitment to his kingdom can be traced back to the values his mother instilled in him during his formative years. Blanche of Castile's legacy is one of devotion, determination, and the fierce protection of her child. Her political acumen, combined with her maternal love and ambition, ensured that her son would grow up to become one of the most revered kings of medieval France. She was a queen who understood the intricacies of power and the lengths one must go to preserve it, especially when it involved safeguarding the future of her family and her kingdom. Historians still discuss whether Blanche's methods were too harsh or too aggressive. Her rule was often seen as one of formidable control, and her insistence on maintaining power for her son raised questions about the role of women in medieval politics. However, no one can deny that Blanche was a mother who would do anything to see her son thrive, even if it meant making difficult, sometimes ruthless decisions. In the end, her love for Louis IX and her unshakable will to see him succeed left a lasting imprint on the French monarchy. As you close your eyes tonight, remember Blanche not just as a queen, but as a mother who refused to let anyone stand in the way of her son's destiny. Her legacy as a protector of her family and a shrewd political mind reminds us that the strength of a queen lies not just in the crown she wears, but in the fierce determination to protect what she holds most dear. Joan of Navarre, the cunning queen. Joan of Navarre, a name that may not immediately come to mind when thinking of powerful medieval queens, was a woman who wielded remarkable influence through cunning, patience, and an unwavering will to protect her position. Born around 1273, Joan was the daughter of the King of Navarre, a small kingdom located in what is now northern Spain and southern France. She married King Henry IV of England in 1403, a union that would place her in the heart of English royal politics and shape her role as a queen who, despite facing immense political challenges, rose to power in ways few could have anticipated. Joan's marriage to Henry IV was not a typical royal alliance. By the time they married, Henry was in a politically unstable position, having just claimed the throne in a disputed succession. The English throne was fraught with internal conflicts, most notably the ongoing Wars of the Roses between the Lancasters and the Yorkists. Despite these troubles, Joan was a queen consort who would quickly prove that her influence would be felt far beyond the confines of her marriage. When Henry IV died in 1413, Joan was left a widow with little direct power over the English throne. Her son, Henry V, ascended the throne, but Joan's role was far from diminished. As Henry V's mother, Joan remained a vital political figure, particularly in the early years of his reign. She was not only a mother, but also a sharp political strategist who understood the intricacies of royal power, and she quickly adapted to the changing dynamics of the court. However, Joan's biggest challenge came when she was accused of conspiring against her son's rule. In 1419, she was arrested on charges of witchcraft and treason, and she was subsequently imprisoned in the Tower of London. This shocking betrayal by her own son came after Joan became involved in some controversial political dealings. It is unclear exactly why she was accused, but historians often speculate that her support for certain noble factions, coupled with the political turbulence of the time, made her an easy target for accusations of disloyalty. Joan was imprisoned for several years, but throughout this time, she remained silent, never admitting to the charges brought against her. It was only after a lengthy period of incarceration that Joan was released, having been pardoned by Henry V. The reason for her release remains somewhat unclear, though it is likely that Joan's influence, combined with the political climate at the time, played a role in her freedom. While Joan's years in captivity tarnished her reputation, they also solidified her as a queen who could endure immense hardships without breaking under pressure. After her release, she was allowed to live out her final years in relative peace, though her political influence had largely diminished. Joan of Navarre's story is one of complexity, intrigue, and quiet strength. Though she was not able to wield the kind of direct power that some other queens of the period enjoyed, she used her intelligence, her political alliances, and her understanding of the royal court to carve out a space for herself in a male-dominated world. Her strength was in her ability to adapt, survive, and maintain her dignity in the face of great personal loss and public scandal. Historians continue to debate the full extent of Joan's political machinations. Was she truly guilty of the charges of witchcraft and treason, or was she simply a woman caught in a web of court politics and accusations that were often leveled at women with too much influence? Did she use her marriage to Henry IV as a stepping stone to greater political influence, or was she merely trying to navigate a kingdom fraught with danger and uncertainty? Regardless of the truth behind the accusations, Joan's legacy as a queen and a mother is undeniable. She may not have had the same dramatic impact on English history as some of her contemporaries, but her story serves as a reminder of the quiet strength that women often exercised behind the scenes of royal power. Joan's life was defined not by the throne she held, but by the way she navigated the treacherous waters of royal politics, ensuring her survival and maintaining her dignity in the face of adversity. As you lay down tonight, consider the story of Joan of Navarre, a queen who, though not always in the spotlight, managed to carve out a legacy that demonstrated the power of perseverance, patience, and the quiet manipulation of the forces around her. Her story is a testament to the fact that power doesn't always have to be loud. It can be subtle, nuanced, and, at times, just as dangerous. Matilda of Tuscany, the Iron Queen. Matilda of Tuscany, often overlooked in the annals of history, was one of the most powerful and influential women of the Middle Ages. Born in 1046, the daughter of Count Boniface of Tuscany, Matilda's life was shaped by the turbulent political climate of 11th century Italy. Her story is one of remarkable resilience, intelligence, and unmatched political prowess, as she not only navigated the complexities of Italian feudalism, but also played a critical role in the investiture controversy, a bitter conflict between the papacy and the Holy Roman Emperor. Matilda was raised in a world defined by power struggles, with noble families vying for control of land, influence, and above all, loyalty. When her father died in 1052, Matilda inherited his vast territories in northern and central Italy, which included not only Tuscany but also lands in Lombardy and Emilia. Her inheritance made her one of the most powerful women in Italy and placed her in direct opposition to Emperor Henry IV of the Holy Roman Empire, who sought to consolidate his power over the Italian territories. Matilda's greatest legacy was her role in the investiture controversy, a pivotal conflict between the papacy, led by Pope Gregory VII, and the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry IV. At the heart of this dispute was the question of who held the right to appoint bishops and other church officials, the Pope or the Emperor. This conflict would shape the course of European history for centuries, and Matilda's involvement in it would mark her as a key figure in medieval politics. Although a laywoman, Matilda was a staunch supporter of Pope Gregory VII, believing that the church should be independent of secular rule. She not only defended the papacy's right to appoint bishops, but also played a critical role in securing the Pope's position during the ongoing struggles between the Emperor and the Church. In 1077, Henry IV, unable to exert his control over Italy, was forced to perform the humiliating walk to Canossa, where he stood barefoot in the snow, begging for forgiveness from Pope Gregory. This dramatic moment in history was largely orchestrated by Matilda, who, with her stronghold in northern Italy, helped ensure that the Pope had the resources and support needed to humiliate the Emperor and secure the papacy's autonomy. Matilda's support for the papacy was not without consequence. The conflict between the Pope and the Emperor dragged on for decades, and Matilda's lands became a battleground. As the Emperor's forces continued to press against her territories, Matilda proved herself an extraordinary military leader. She was able to rally troops, defend her lands, and even retake cities from imperial forces. Her ability to command both the political and military arenas made her one of the most formidable women in medieval Europe. Her role as a military leader was not limited to defending her lands, however. Matilda also played a crucial part in negotiating the peace that ultimately resolved the investiture controversy. After Gregory's death, her loyalty to the papacy and her political acumen continued to shape her actions. She worked tirelessly to ensure that the papacy remained a powerful force in Italy, often aligning herself with other European powers to preserve the balance of power in the region. Despite her immense power, Matilda's later years were marked by personal and political challenges. In 1115, after years of conflict with the emperor, Matilda died at the age of 69. Her death marked the end of an era for the papacy's influence in Italy, but her legacy lived on. Her lands were eventually absorbed into the Holy Roman Empire, but her role in defending the church and her military and political leadership continued to be remembered. Historians still debate the full extent of Matilda's influence. Was she simply a woman acting in the interests of the church, or was she a political mastermind who understood the intricacies of power and warfare? Some see her as a feminist icon, a woman who defied the constraints of her time and achieved remarkable feats in a male-dominated world. Others argue that her power was a product of her family's wealth and the support of the papacy. Regardless of how one views her, there's no denying that Matilda of Tuscany was a force to be reckoned with. Matilda's story is a reminder that power in the Middle Ages was not reserved for kings and emperors alone. Women like Matilda were able to wield immense influence and shape the course of history through their political, military, and diplomatic efforts. Matilda's ability to navigate the complex political landscape of 11th century Italy, her devotion to the church, and her military prowess cemented her place in history as one of the most remarkable queens of the medieval world. As you lie down to sleep tonight, think of Matilda's iron will, her unyielding determination, and her unwavering loyalty to the causes she believed in. Her story is a reminder that the strength of a leader is not defined by their gender, but by their actions and their ability to change the world around them. Matilda's legacy lives on, not just in the history of Italy, but in the hearts of all who strive to leave their mark on the world. Queen Berengaria of Navarre, the abandoned queen. Queen Berengaria of Navarre, one of the lesser-known figures of the Middle Ages, experienced a life filled with unrealized potential, political intrigue, and personal abandonment. Born in 1165, as the daughter of King Sancho VI of Navarra, Berengaria was destined for greatness. Yet, her legacy is often overshadowed by the actions of her husband, Richard the Lionheart, and the strange circumstances of their marriage. Despite this, Berengaria's story is one of resilience and courage. A woman who was sidelined in her own marriage but still managed to leave a mark on history. Berengaria's early years were spent in the Kingdom of Navarre, a small but strategically important kingdom in the Pyrenees. Her marriage to Richard I of England, more famously known as Richard the Lionheart, was arranged in 1190 as part of a political alliance designed to strengthen ties between England and Navarre. The marriage was intended to secure Berengaria's place as Queen Consort of England, and the match was significant not only for its diplomatic value but for the promise of royal power that came with it. However, Berengaria's marriage to Richard was far from ordinary. The couple's wedding, which took place in 1191, was a bittersweet event. Richard had already embarked on the Third Crusade, and as a result was absent from his new bride for much of their early marriage. Berengaria joined Richard on his journey to the Holy Land, where they were married in Cyprus. But shortly after the wedding, Richard was called away to war, leaving her behind. This abandonment set the tone for much of their marriage. Although Berengaria was crowned Queen Consort of England, she was seldom by Richard's side during his reign, as he spent much of his time in France and on military campaigns. This absence of their marriage would become a central theme in Berengaria's life. While Richard was away on military campaigns, Berengaria was largely confined to England, far from the action and political decisions that defined the medieval royal court. Though she held the title of queen, she was left without the power or influence typically associated with the role. The kingdom was largely governed by Richard's officials, and Berengaria had little opportunity to make her presence felt on the political stage. Even when Richard was captured in 1192 during his return from the Crusades and held for ransom by the Duke of Austria, Berengaria was once again sidelined. She was unable to secure her husband's release, which was instead negotiated by Richard's mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, and his political allies. While Berengaria remained in England, the absence of Richard left her isolated, with little influence over the affairs of the kingdom. When Richard finally returned to England in 1194 after his release, his reign continued without much of Berengaria's involvement. They lived apart for much of the remaining years of Richard's life, and when he died in 1199, Berengaria was left with little to claim for herself. She never bore Richard any children, and after his death, she faded into obscurity, retreating to the quiet confines of her lands in Navarre. Despite her royal status, Berengaria spent much of her life as a figurehead rather than an active political force. Historians have long debated Berengaria's legacy. Was she a passive queen, sidelined by her husband's ambitious military pursuits? Or was she a queen whose potential was never fully realized due to the circumstances of her marriage? In truth, Berengaria's life was shaped by the choices of those around her, particularly Richard's constant absence and the absence of direct political power. However, what remains clear is that Berengaria was a woman of dignity, and despite the neglect of her marriage, she remained loyal to Richard throughout his life. One of the most poignant aspects of Berengaria's life is her relationship with Richard. While their marriage may have been distant in practice, it was one that held considerable political importance. Berengaria was not just a pawn in the grand scheme of medieval politics. She was a queen who, despite being left in the shadows, held her head high. After Richard's death, Berengaria retired to a quiet life in the royal court of Navarre, where she lived out the remainder of her years. Berengaria of Navarre may not have been one of the more famous queens of medieval Europe, but her story is one of quiet resilience and the hardships faced by women in power during the Middle Ages. Her legacy, though less dramatic than those of other queens, reminds us that many women in history held power in ways that were not always obvious, and that their contributions to the monarchy were sometimes confined to a quieter, less glamorous role. As you settle in for the night, reflect on Berengaria's quiet strength. Though she was largely forgotten in the history books, her legacy is a testament to the resilience of women in royal positions, who often had to navigate not only the pressures of politics, but the personal isolation that came with being a queen consort in an age where a woman's influence was often limited. Ruthless Queen Lucrezia Borgia. Lucrezia Borgia, The name alone evokes images of intrigue, betrayal, and scandal. Born in 1480 to the infamous Pope Alexander VI and his mistress, Vanosa dei Catanae, Lucrezia's early life was steeped in the shadow of her father's papacy and the corrupt and dangerous world of Renaissance Italy. The Borgia family was notorious for its political manipulations, debauchery, and ruthless ambition, and Lucrezia was no exception to this legacy. Though often viewed through the lens of her family's scandals, Lucrezia's own actions were far more complex and significant than history has allowed her to be remembered for. Her marriage to Giovanni Sforza, the son of the Duke of Milan, was a political arrangement aimed at solidifying alliances between the Borgia family and the powerful Sforza clan. However, the marriage was fraught with tension and suspicion. The marriage was annulled in 1497, with rumours swirling that it was never consummated. Whether this was true or not remains a subject of debate, but it marked the beginning of a pattern in Lucrezia's life, relationships shaped by political maneuvering rather than genuine affection. But it was her subsequent marriages and her involvement in her family's political machinations that would cement Lucrezia's reputation. Her second marriage to Alfonso of Aragon, a union that began with great promise, ended tragically in violence and death. Alfonso, Lucrezia's second husband, was murdered in 1500 under mysterious circumstances, though many believe it was orchestrated by her brother, Cesare Borgia, who had ambitions of his own. The death of Alfonso marked the turning point in Lucrezia's life, transforming her from a pawn in the Borgia family's schemes to a more independent, politically astute player in her own right. Despite her father's and brother's violent methods of securing power, Lucrezia managed to survive and even thrive within this web of intrigue. In 1502, she married Alfonso I d'Este, the Duke of Ferrara, a union that brought her both political power and security. She flourished in Ferrara, wielding influence at court and establishing herself as a patron of the arts. This period in her life was marked by a newfound sense of independence, away from the shadow of the Borgia family's scandals. However, her time with the Este family was not without its own challenges. While she was able to carve out a degree of autonomy, her political savvy was always tempered by the baggage of her Borgia name. Her reputation as a poisoner and a schemer was largely a product of the rumours and propaganda spread by her enemies, but it was also a reflection of the times in which she lived. Lucrezia was a woman in a world where political power was often exercised through marriage, intrigue, and assassination. While some of the darker rumours about her were exaggerated, she was undoubtedly involved in the brutal world of Italian politics, using the tools available to her to navigate this cutthroat landscape. Lucrezia's legacy has been obscured by centuries of myth and innuendo. She was often depicted as the femme fatale, a woman who was both a victim and a villain in the drama of her family's rise and fall. But modern historians have begun to reassess her role in history. While she was undoubtedly a product of her family's ambition and brutality, she also demonstrated intelligence, political acumen, and a degree of independence that was remarkable for a woman in the 15th and 16th centuries. Historians still argue about the extent of Lucrezia's involvement in the dark politics of her time. Was she an active participant in her family's schemes, or was she merely caught in the machinations of her father and brother? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Lucrezia was undoubtedly complicit in some of the Borgia family's actions, but she was also a victim of their excesses. Her role in her family's rise to power cannot be dismissed, but neither can the complexity of her position as a woman trying to navigate a dangerous world of power and politics. As you drift off to sleep tonight, think of Lucrezia Borgia, a woman caught in a world of ambition, cruelty, and scandal, but also a woman who managed to carve out a space for herself in that world. Her life reminds us that, while history often focuses on the grand schemes and the men who make them, the women who navigated these turbulent times were often the ones who truly shaped the future. Cecilia of Sweden, the tragic queen. Cecilia of Sweden's life was marked by both personal heartbreak and political complexity, a tragedy of fate that ultimately led to her untimely demise. Born in 1401, Cecilia came from a noble family in Sweden, and by the time she reached adulthood, she was married to King Christopher of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. This marriage, however, was not one of love, but of political necessity, aligning the powerful Scandinavian kingdoms and securing peace among them. But Cecilia's life was never destined to be easy, and her time as queen would be short, fraught with strife and sorrow. Her reign as queen consort was overshadowed by the early death of her husband, King Christopher, in 1448. At just 47, Christopher's death left Cecilia in a precarious position, especially as she had no direct claim to the throne. After his death, the throne was passed to another ruler, and Cecilia's role as queen was rendered largely ceremonial. However, her ambitions did not end there. Cecilia found herself at the heart of a political battle to maintain her influence within the courts of Denmark and Sweden. Despite the power and prestige of being a queen consort, Cecilia was never able to fully exercise her authority in the way she had hoped. With her husband's death, her position weakened, and political intrigue consumed the Scandinavian kingdoms. As the kingdoms of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway began to divide, Cecilia became a pawn in the ever-shifting alliances and intrigues that defined medieval European politics. Her efforts to secure her son's claim to the throne were thwarted by rival factions, and despite her royal status, she was left powerless in the face of the growing turmoil. Despite her personal tragedies, Cecilia's resilience in the face of these obstacles was remarkable. As the mother of a future king, she tried to maintain influence through diplomatic channels and alliances. However, her grief at her husband's death and the constant political upheaval wore her down. In 1449, she passed away at the age of 48, a life cut short by the burdens of courtly expectations, political strife, and personal loss. Historians often reflect on Cecilia's life as an example of a woman who was unable to gain the power or influence that her position as a queen consort should have afforded her. While other queens may have thrived in times of political instability, Cecilia's story was one of survival rather than triumph. She struggled to maintain her position in a world that was dominated by the men who controlled the throne, and despite her efforts, she was never able to truly secure the future of her lineage. What makes Cecilia's story especially tragic is the lost potential of her reign. Had she been given the opportunity to rule, Cecilia could have used her position to stabilize the fractious kingdoms of Scandinavia, but she was never allowed that chance. Instead, her life was consumed by grief and political intrigue, leaving behind only a faint echo of what might have been. Cecilia's death did not mark the end of her family's involvement in the politics of Scandinavia, but it did mark the end of her personal ambitions. The political landscape would continue to shift, and future queens would rise to take on greater roles in the courts of Europe. But Cecilia's story serves as a poignant reminder that many women in the Middle Ages lived lives of unfulfilled promise, caught in the undertow of political forces beyond their control. As you reflect tonight, consider Cecilia's life. Though she did not achieve the power that was so often the destiny of queens in history, she still fought with every ounce of strength she had to maintain her position. Her story is a reminder that history often overlooks the lives of those who live in the shadow of others, but their struggles were no less real. Queen Mary I of England, the Bloody Queen. Queen Mary I of England, often remembered as Bloody Mary, has one of the most tumultuous and tragic legacies of any ruler in European history. Born in 1516 as the daughter of King Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, Mary's life was shaped by the religious and political upheaval of 16th-century England. Her reign, though short, would be defined by her efforts to restore Catholicism to England, a mission that would lead to one of the bloodiest and most contentious periods in English history. Mary's early life was marked by her turbulent relationship with her father. When Henry VIII broke with the Roman Catholic Church in the 1532 over his desire for a divorce from Catherine, Mary's mother, she was declared illegitimate and removed from the line of succession. Mary was a devout Catholic, and her father's actions, including the dissolution of monasteries and the establishment of the Church of England, were deeply troubling to her. For much of her youth, she lived in the shadow of her father's political and religious reforms, which had fractured England's relationship with the Catholic Church. In 1553, after the death of her half-brother, Edward VI, Mary ascended to the throne. Her coronation was met with hope from the Catholic population of England, who longed for a return to the traditions of the Roman Church. However, Mary's reign was immediately clouded by the opposition of Protestant factions, which had grown significantly under Edward VI's rule. The Protestant reformers saw Mary as a direct threat to the religious changes they had established and were determined to resist her efforts to restore Catholicism. In 1554, Mary married Philip II of Spain, a match that was politically strategic but deeply unpopular with many of her subjects. The union, which was intended to strengthen England's ties to Catholic Europe, sparked fears of Spanish influence over English affairs and heightened tensions with the Protestant nobility. The marriage only fueled opposition to her reign and made her struggle for religious restoration even more difficult. Mary's reign is most infamous for the Marian persecutions, a series of brutal executions of Protestants that occurred between 1555 and 1558. In an attempt to rid England of Protestantism and restore Catholicism, Mary ordered the execution of over 280 Protestants, including prominent religious leaders, women, and men who had previously resisted the Church's authority. These executions were carried out by burning at the stake, a horrific and public method that earned her the nickname Bloody Mary. The sight of Protestants being burned alive in the streets of London and other cities shocked the English public and cemented Mary's legacy as a ruthless and intolerant monarch. While Mary's persecution of Protestants was undoubtedly one of the darkest chapters of her reign, it was also a reflection of her deep belief in the Catholic faith and her desire to restore England to what she considered the true path of righteousness. For Mary, her actions were justified by her religious convictions, and she saw the executions as a necessary means of preserving her kingdom and her soul. But in the eyes of the Protestant reformers and many of her contemporaries, Mary's actions were those of a tyrant, driven by religious zeal and a sense of divine righteousness. Despite her efforts to restore Catholicism, Mary's reign was ultimately unsuccessful in achieving long-term religious peace in England. After her death in 1558, her half-sister, Elizabeth I, succeeded her to the throne and firmly re-established Protestantism in England. Elizabeth's reign would be defined by religious tolerance and stability, and Mary's efforts to reverse the Reformation were undone. However, the Marian persecutions left a scar on English history, and Mary's name became synonymous with religious intolerance and violence. Historians continue to debate the legacy of Mary I. Was she simply a woman in a world where political and religious strife were inescapable, or was she a ruler consumed by the need to restore her mother's legacy and her faith at any cost? Was she driven by genuine conviction, or was she a ruler so entrenched in her beliefs that she failed to see the consequences of her actions? While there is no easy answer, it is clear that Mary's reign left a profound impact on England, one that would resonate for generations to come. As you reflect on Mary's story tonight, think of the complexities of her reign, her faith, her struggles, and the tragic cost of her efforts. Mary's reign is a reminder that rulers, particularly women in positions of power, are often judged not just by their actions but by the broader tides of history and the conflicts that define their era. Catherine the Great, the enlightened monarch. Catherine the Great, or Catherine II of Russia, is remembered as one of the most remarkable monarchs in European history. Born in 1729 as Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst in what is now Germany, she rose from the relatively humble beginnings of a minor German princess to become Empress of Russia, expanding the Russian Empire and making it one of the most powerful nations in the world. Known for her intelligence, political shrewdness, and reformist vision, Catherine is often celebrated as the archetype of an enlightened despot. Her reign, lasting from 762, until her death in 1796, transformed Russia politically, culturally, and economically, cementing her as one of the most significant rulers of the 18th century. Catherine's rise to power was far from straightforward. At the age of 14, she was married off to the future Emperor Peter III of Russia, a man whose reign would be short and deeply unpopular. While Catherine initially arrived in Russia as a foreign princess, she quickly adapted to the Russian court, learning the language and customs. However, her marriage to Peter was an unhappy one. Peter was often described as childish and erratic, which led to a growing rift between him and his wife. Catherine, on the other hand, was ambitious and politically astute, observing and learning the intricacies of Russian politics in preparation for the future. In 1762, Catherine's moment came when she staged a coup against her husband, who had alienated both the nobility and the military. Peter III was overthrown, and within days, Catherine was declared Empress of Russia. Her ascent to the throne was not bloodless, but it was far less violent than many similar coups of the era. Once on the throne, Catherine worked to solidify her position, gaining the support of the nobility and military leaders who had grown weary of her husband's rule. Despite her relatively peaceful takeover, Catherine was keenly aware of the need to maintain authority and prevent any future challenges to her power. Catherine's reign was marked by a deep commitment to the principles of the Enlightenment, a philosophical movement that emphasized reason, individual rights, and the rejection of traditional authority. Although she was an autocrat, ruling with absolute power, Catherine admired Enlightenment ideas and sought to reform Russian society based on these principles. She corresponded with prominent Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot, incorporating some of their ideas into her governance. Under her reign, Russia saw a flourishing of arts and culture, as well as attempts to modernize the legal system. One of her most significant achievements was her expansion of the Russian Empire. Catherine expanded Russia's borders substantially through military campaigns, particularly against the Ottoman Empire and Poland. She annexed Crimea, expanded Russia's influence in Eastern Europe, and divided Poland between Russia, Austria, and Prussia in a series of partitions that eliminated Poland as an independent state. These military conquests added vast territories to Russia and solidified her reputation as a powerful leader. But Catherine's reign was not without its challenges. Her commitment to Enlightenment principles conflicted with the realities of governing a vast and diverse empire, and many of her attempts at reform faced significant resistance. Her efforts to abolish serfdom were unsuccessful, and the growing dissatisfaction among the serfs eventually led to uprisings, most notably the Pugachev Rebellion of 1773. While the rebellion was ultimately suppressed, it highlighted the deep social divisions in Russia and the limitations of Catherine's reforms. Despite her autocratic rule, Catherine was a shrewd and effective leader who skillfully navigated the complexities of Russian politics. She was able to balance the interests of the nobility, the military, and the church while maintaining absolute control over the state. Her reign is often remembered for its cultural and intellectual achievements, as well as its expansion of Russian power and territory. Historians still debate the extent to which Catherine's reforms truly changed Russian society. Was she truly an enlightened ruler, or was she simply an ambitious monarch using Enlightenment rhetoric to justify her actions? Some view her as a visionary who sought to modernize Russia, while others argue that she maintained the status quo and reinforced the power of the aristocracy. Regardless of where one stands on this debate, there is no denying that Catherine's reign marked a pivotal moment in Russian history, and her legacy as one of the great female rulers of history is firmly established. As you settle down tonight, think of Catherine the Great, a woman who rose from obscurity to become the ruler of an empire that spanned continents, a woman who used both her intelligence and her ruthlessness to shape the course of Russian history. Her life reminds us that power, for those who wield it wisely, can bring both greatness and challenges. And though Catherine's reign was not without its contradictions, It is a story that continues to inspire those who believe that one's gender should never limit their potential to lead. Queen Victoria, the Empress of Many. Queen Victoria, whose reign spanned from 1837 to 1901, defined an entire era in British history. Known as the Victorian Age, this period saw Britain reach the height of its power, with the British Empire becoming the largest empire in the world. Victoria's rule not only shaped the social, cultural, and political landscape of Britain, but also influenced much of the world. Her reign marked a time of profound change, from the Industrial Revolution to the expansion of imperial power, and her personal life marked by love, loss, and political influence has captivated historians and the public alike for generations. Victoria was born in 1819 to Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, and Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. At the time of her birth, the British throne seemed distant, as her father was the fourth in line to the throne. However, her father's early death in 1820 and the subsequent death of her uncles brought her closer to the crown. In 1837, at the age of 18, Victoria ascended to the throne following the death of her uncle, King William IV. Her youth, combined with the responsibility thrust upon her, made her a figurehead who needed to quickly adjust to the complexities of monarchy. Victoria's early reign was marked by her struggle to balance personal life and royal duty. In 1840, she married Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, her cousin, whom she deeply loved and admired. Albert, though never officially crowned king, became Victoria's closest advisor and a powerful influence on her decisions. The couple's marriage, though often idealized as a love match, also solidified Victoria's role as a monarch with significant domestic support. Albert's intellect and progressive views had a profound impact on Victoria, and together they worked to modernize Britain, both culturally and politically. Under Victoria's leadership, Britain experienced profound social and economic transformations. The Industrial Revolution, which began earlier in the century, reached its peak during her reign, reshaping the British economy and society. The empire expanded, reaching territories in Africa, India, and beyond, and Britain became the dominant global power. Victoria, as the head of the British Empire, was also declared Empress of India in 1876, further consolidating her power on the global stage. This period of imperial expansion, however, also brought with it exploitation, racial tensions, and a legacy of colonialism that would cast long shadows over future generations. Despite her personal affection for Albert, Victoria's reign was not without challenges. Her relationship with the British government and Parliament was often fraught with tension. Though Victoria was technically the sovereign, much of the day-to-day governance was carried out by ministers, and her role was largely ceremonial. She struggled to balance her personal beliefs with the expectations of the monarchy. Her reign also saw political unrest in Ireland, and her relationship with Ireland became strained, especially after the Great Famine of the 1842. Additionally, social movements for reform, women's rights, and labour laws challenged the established order. Victoria's personal life was equally eventful. After Albert's untimely death in 1861, Victoria fell into a deep mourning, retreating from public life for many years. Her grief became a defining feature of her later reign, and she wore black for the rest of her life in mourning for Albert. Despite her private sorrow, Victoria continued to reign with authority and strength, though her personal isolation grew. Her children, many of whom married into European royal families, helped to solidify her legacy as the matriarch of a family of Europe, linking her to various royal dynasties across the continent. Victoria's reign, though marked by personal loss and political challenge, was ultimately a period of immense progress and transformation for Britain and the world. By the time of her death in 1901, the British Empire had become the largest empire in history, and Britain had reached the pinnacle of global power. Her legacy, however, is not just defined by imperialism or political influence. It is also marked by the moral and social values of the Victorian era, including an emphasis on duty, propriety and a strong sense of personal responsibility. Historians continue to debate Victoria's role in the expansion of the British Empire and her relationship with the government. Was she merely a figurehead who adapted to the changing nature of monarchy, or was she an active participant in shaping British policies? While she may not have wielded political power in the same way as some of her predecessors, Victoria's personal influence and the symbolism of her reign were undeniable. She was the embodiment of Victorian ideals, and her leadership helped navigate Britain through a century of immense change. As you lie down to sleep tonight, think of Queen Victoria, a woman who ruled over an empire at its height, who navigated the challenges of leadership with grace, and who balanced her personal grief with her public duties. Her story is a reminder that power, even when not exercised directly, can still shape the world profoundly, and that the mark of a great ruler is often found in the legacy they leave behind, not just in the policies they enact. Queen Christina of Sweden, the rebel queen. Queen Christina of Sweden, one of the most unconventional monarchs of the 17th century, broke nearly every royal tradition. Born in 1626, Christina was the only child of King Gustavus Adolphus, the Swedish warrior king who died in battle when she was just 6 years old. Her childhood was marked by the promise of a throne and the weight of an empire that would rest on her shoulders. Yet, unlike most princesses who grew up preparing for the duties of a queen consort, Christina had no intention of following the typical path of a monarch. She would live her life on her own terms, challenging the conventions of her time, and forever altering the legacy of Sweden. Christina's early years were dominated by political intrigue and regency. Her father's untimely death left Sweden in a state of uncertainty, and Christina's mother, Maria Eleanor of Brandenburg, was emotionally unstable and unable to effectively rule. As a result, Christina was raised by a regent and was heavily influenced by her tutors, who were intellectuals and scholars. Christina was fascinated by philosophy, literature, and art, and by the time she ascended to the throne in 1644 at the age of 18, she was already known for her remarkable intellect and unconventional interests. Unlike her predecessors, she was more interested in fostering a cultural renaissance in Sweden than in the traditional matters of statecraft or military conquest. When Christina became queen, she immediately took steps to distinguish herself from other European monarchs. She refused to marry, citing her desire to remain independent and focused on intellectual pursuits. Her decision to remain single was highly controversial, as marriage was seen as the cornerstone of royal alliances and the continuation of dynastic power. Christina's refusal to marry led to speculation about her sexuality, and over time, her nonconformity would become one of the defining aspects of her reign. Christina's reign was marked by significant cultural and intellectual contributions. She invited some of the greatest minds of the time to her court, including philosophers such as René Descartes, whom she greatly admired. She established a cultural climate in Sweden that encouraged the arts and intellectual exchange, making Stockholm a hub for scholars and artists. Her patronage of the arts was unparalleled, and under her rule, Swedish art and literature flourished. Christina's love for the arts and intellectual pursuits earned her respect among scholars, though it alienated many of her contemporaries who believed that a queen's primary duty was to manage her kingdom and secure her dynasty. However, Christina's reign was also fraught with tension. Her intellectualism and neglect of the military and state matters led to criticism from the Swedish nobility and political establishment. Sweden, which had once been a dominant military power in Europe under her father, was beginning to lose its edge. Christina's reluctance to take a hands-on role in governance caused frustration among her advisors and led to growing dissatisfaction with her rule. In 1654, after only 22 years on the throne, Christina made the unprecedented decision to abdicate the Swedish crown, citing her desire to live a life devoted to culture and the pursuit of knowledge rather than the burdens of rule. Christina's abdication was a stunning move. She not only gave up her throne but also shocked the world by converting to Catholicism, a bold decision in a time when Sweden was staunchly Protestant. Her conversion was seen as a betrayal of Sweden's Protestant identity and many of her subjects were deeply disturbed by her abandonment of the religion. After her abdication, Christina moved to Rome, where she lived for the remainder of her life. She became a figure of fascination and controversy in Europe, continuing to patronize the arts and engage in intellectual pursuits. She surrounded herself with artists, philosophers, and writers, but her personal life remained enigmatic. Despite her abdication, Christina's legacy is undeniably significant. Her decision to abdicate the throne and abandon the traditional expectations of monarchy was revolutionary for her time. She did not fit the mold of the typical queen. Instead, she carved her own path, one that defied the conventions of royalty and gave her the freedom to pursue her intellectual and cultural passions. Christina is remembered not just for her reign, but for her audacity to live as she saw fit, regardless of the expectations placed upon her as a monarch. Historians continue to debate Christina's reign and her decision to abdicate. Was she a failed monarch, too consumed by her intellectual pursuits to govern effectively? Or was she a visionary who saw the limitations of her role as queen and chose to live a life true to herself? Some view her as a trailblazer who defied the norms of her time, while others see her abdication as an abdication of duty. Regardless of the interpretation, Christina's reign remains one of the most fascinating and unconventional in European history. As you reflect on Queen Christina's life tonight, consider the courage it took to defy the expectations of a monarch and chart her own course. She was a queen who chose a different path, a path that led her to cultural renown and intellectual fulfillment, but also to personal isolation and controversy. Christina's story reminds us that greatness doesn't always come from following the established rules, but from having the courage to create one's own. Anne Boleyn, the rise and fall of a queen. Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII and the mother of Queen Elizabeth I, is one of history's most famous and controversial figures. Her story, filled with ambition, passion, and tragedy, is a tale that shaped the course of English history. Anne's life was intricately intertwined with the religious and political upheaval of the 16th century, and her actions would ultimately lead to the formation of the Church of England, a legacy that would forever change the face of Christianity. Born in 1501, Anne Boleyn came from an aristocratic family with connections at the English court. Her early years were spent in the Netherlands and France, where she was educated in the arts and the sophisticated courtly traditions of European elites. Upon her return to England, Anne quickly caught the attention of King Henry VIII, who was already married to Catherine of Aragon. Their attraction was immediate, but Anne refused to become just another mistress to Henry. She had bigger ambitions, and her refusal to be his lover on his terms ultimately set the stage for the most significant political and religious changes in England. By the early 1532, Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon was faltering. Henry, desperate for a male heir, sought to annul his marriage to Catherine so he could marry Anne. However, the Pope refused to annul the marriage, and in a move that would forever change the course of English history, Henry broke from the Roman Catholic Church and established the Church of England, placing himself as the supreme head of the Church. Anne, now pregnant, married Henry in 1533, and shortly thereafter she was crowned Queen Consort. However, despite her ambitious rise, Anne's reign as queen was short and filled with turbulence. Anne's time as queen was marked by a series of personal and political struggles. Though she gave birth to Elizabeth, who would later become one of England's greatest monarchs, she failed to provide Henry with the longed-for male heir. As a result, her position at court became increasingly precarious. Anne was caught in a dangerous web of courtly politics, with enemies plotting against her at every turn. Her downfall began in 1536, when she was arrested and charged with adultery, incest, and high treason. The charges, widely considered to be fabricated, were part of a plot by her political enemies to remove her from power and pave the way for Henry's marriage to Jane Seymour, whom he hoped would give him the male heir he so desperately desired. Anne's trial was a sham, and she was found guilty of all charges. On May 19, 536, she was executed by beheading at the Tower of London. Her death marked the tragic and swift end of a reign that had promised much but delivered little. Anne was just 35 years old. Despite her tragic end, Anne Boleyn's legacy lived on through her daughter, Elizabeth, who would go on to become one of England's most revered monarchs. Elizabeth I, the daughter of Anne and Henry, restored stability to England, securing her place in history as one of the greatest rulers in British history. It was Elizabeth's reign, known as the Elizabethan era, that solidified England's position as a global power and further distanced the country from the Catholic Church, which had been a key issue in Anne's life and downfall. Historians still debate the extent of Anne's culpability in the charges brought against her. Was she truly guilty of the crimes she was accused of, or was she the victim of a politically motivated conspiracy? Many believe that Anne's downfall was largely due to her failure to produce a male heir, which left her vulnerable in a court that valued dynastic stability above all else. Others argue that Anne's fierce ambition and refusal to conform to the traditional role of a queen consort contributed to her enemies' desire to see her removed. Whatever the cause of her downfall, Anne's tragic fate underscores the perils of being a woman in a time when power was largely in the hands of men. Anne's story is also a reminder of how a single individual can change the course of history. Had Anne not been in Henry's life, the English Reformation may never have taken place, and the course of religious history in England and beyond would have been vastly different. Anne's ambition, though it led to her downfall, helped shape the future of England and Europe, making her one of the most pivotal figures in history. As you reflect on Anne Boleyn tonight, consider her rise to power, her tragic fall, and the legacy she left behind. Though her life was short and filled with tragedy, Anne Boleyn's story is a testament to the power of ambition, the peril of political intrigue, and the lasting impact one individual can have on the world. Queen Zenobia, the warrior Queen of Palmyra. Queen Zenobia of Palmyra is a figure whose name echoes through history, not only for her beauty and intelligence, but also for her indomitable spirit and military prowess. Zenobia was born into the royal family of Palmyra, a city in the Roman Empire located in what is now Syria. By the time she ascended to the throne, Palmyra had already been a flourishing city-state, enjoying wealth from trade and its strategic position along the Silk Road. However, her reign would make it a powerful rival to Rome itself, and would mark the city's tragic downfall. Zenobia became queen in the mid-3rd century CE, following the death of her husband, King Odenathus, who had served as the ruler of Palmyra. After Odenathus's death, Zenobia took charge of the kingdom, initially as regent for her young son, Vabalithus. However, it quickly became clear that Zenobia was not content with being a mere regent. She was a ruler in her own right. Under her leadership, Palmyra expanded its territory significantly, stretching its influence over Egypt, parts of Asia Minor, and even into the heart of Roman territories in the eastern provinces. Zenobia's reign marked a period of bold military campaigns and political ambitions that defied Roman authority. She began to expand Palmyra's power, and her army achieved several significant victories against Roman forces. At its peak, Zenobia controlled much of the Eastern Roman Empire, including Egypt, a region that had been under Roman control for centuries. The audacity of Zenobia's actions rattled the Roman Empire, and her rising power was seen as a direct challenge to Roman supremacy. Her military acumen was remarkable. Zenobia personally led her armies in battle, earning a reputation as both a fierce warrior and a skilled tactician. Her forces were able to defeat several Roman legions, and they even laid siege to the city of Antioch, a major Roman stronghold in the east. Zenobia also cultivated a reputation for wisdom and diplomacy, often employing alliances with other regional powers to strengthen her position. However, Zenobia's challenge to Roman authority eventually led to her downfall. In 270 CE, Emperor Aurelian, one of Rome's most capable military leaders, launched a campaign to reclaim the territories Zenobia had seized. Despite her best efforts to resist, Zenobia's forces were ultimately defeated, and Palmyra was captured by the Romans. Zenobia herself was taken prisoner and brought to Rome in chains, paraded through the streets in a triumph, a public display of humiliation. What happened to Zenobia after her capture remains unclear, with varying accounts suggesting she was either executed or allowed to live out her days in relative luxury under house arrest. However, what remains indisputable is the legacy she left behind as one of the most powerful women to challenge Roman authority. Her determination and strength in the face of overwhelming odds have made her a symbol of resistance and resilience, and her story continues to inspire people today. Historians still debate Zenobia's motivations and her role in the fall of Palmyra. Was she a visionary who sought to create a new Eastern empire, or was she simply a ruler who sought to protect and expand her kingdom within the constraints of a rapidly changing world? Some see her as a visionary, while others view her as a tragic figure caught in the ambitious undertow of her time. Regardless of the interpretation, Zenobia's actions certainly altered the course of history, and her challenge to Roman authority remains one of the most remarkable episodes in the ancient world. Zenobia's legacy as a warrior queen has been immortalized in both literature and history, and she has come to represent the powerful and often underestimated role women played in the politics and military affairs of ancient times. Her refusal to bow to the might of Rome and her insistence on asserting Palmyra's independence showcases the strength and determination that women in power have exhibited throughout history. As you reflect on Queen Zenobia tonight, think of the courage it took for her to defy an empire and to fight for her kingdom's survival. Zenobia's story reminds us that sometimes true power lies in the willingness to challenge the status quo, no matter how formidable the opponent. Empress Matilda, the medieval queen who fought for the throne. Empress Matilda, daughter of King Henry I of England, is a figure whose name has long been associated with struggle, ambition, and perseverance. Her life, marked by a fierce determination to claim her birthright, embodies the chaotic and violent nature of medieval English politics. Despite her royal blood, Matilda's path to power was not one of privilege but of bitter conflict, as she battled both external enemies and internal doubts about a woman's right to rule. Her life, while ultimately not crowned with the throne she sought, laid the groundwork for one of the most powerful dynasties in English history. Matilda was born in 1102, the eldest child of Henry I, and as the only surviving legitimate child, she was the rightful heir to the English throne. However, her position was complicated by the political dynamics of the time. When Matilda's father died in 1135, she was in France, married to the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry V. At the time of his death, her half-brother, Stephen of Blois, quickly seized the throne, declaring himself king. The political crisis that followed, known as the Anarchy, was a brutal civil war over who would truly rule England. Stephen was a strong contender, but Matilda, supported by her own powerful allies, was determined to stake her claim. Matilda's first challenge came from her cousin Stephen's claim to the throne, and she was not content to remain in the background. With support from her uncle, David I of Scotland, and her half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, Matilda raised an army to oppose Stephen's reign. Over the course of several years, Matilda fought to assert her right to the throne, with victories and defeats that alternated with ruthless political maneuvering. Her army besieged key towns and cities, and Matilda was able to capture Stephen on 2 occasions, though she ultimately failed to retain the throne. The conflict was marked by its brutality and the heavy toll it took on the English population. While Matilda's claim to the throne was backed by significant nobility, Stephen's forces were also strong, and the prolonged war brought devastation to much of the country. Despite multiple efforts to solidify her rule, Matilda was unable to win the loyalty of all the English nobles and maintain support for her cause. Her attempts to claim the throne were further complicated by the hostility she faced as a woman fighting for power in a male-dominated society. Matilda's chance at power was ultimately lost in 1141, when her army was forced to retreat from London. However, her perseverance did not go unnoticed. In a turn of fate, Matilda's son, Henry, would go on to succeed where she had failed. Henry II, born during his mother's campaign, ultimately became King of England in 1154 after Stephen's death, and the Plantagenet dynasty was established. Though Matilda never ruled England herself, her son's reign was a direct result of her tireless efforts, and she has often been seen as the mother who laid the foundation for the dynasty that would rule England for centuries. Matilda's story is one of resilience and determination. Despite being forced into the background by the limitations of gender and the political realities of her time, she never relinquished her claim to the throne. Her relentless pursuit of power, even when the odds were stacked against her, serves as an early example of a woman who fought for her birthright in an era when such battles were rarely fought by women. Historians have long debated Matilda's legacy. Was she simply a pawn in a larger political game, or did her actions fundamentally change the course of English history? Many argue that while Matilda's failure to ascend to the throne might have seemed like a loss, her actions laid the groundwork for future generations of female rulers. Matilda's story is also a cautionary tale about the complex nature of medieval politics, where gender and bloodlines often determined one's fate, and the struggle for power was relentless. As you drift off to sleep tonight, think of Empress Matilda, a queen who never gave up on her ambition, whose determination to rule shaped the future of England. She reminds us that even when we face seemingly insurmountable odds, the pursuit of what is rightfully ours can still make an impact for generations to come. Lady Godiva, the woman behind the legend. Lady Godiva, one of the most legendary figures in medieval English history, is often remembered for the dramatic and mythic ride she took through the streets of Coventry, famously riding naked on horseback to protest the oppressive taxes imposed by her husband, Leofric, the Earl of Mercia. While this story has become a symbol of defiance, bravery, and the fight against tyranny, the true history of Lady Godiva is a mixture of legend and reality, blending fact and fiction in a tale that continues to captivate imaginations to this day. Lady Godiva was born in the 11th century into a noble Anglo-Saxon family. She married Leofric in 1043, and together they governed the region of Mercia in what is now central England. Leofric, as the powerful Earl of Mercia, had a reputation for being a tough and sometimes tyrannical ruler. He and Godiva's marriage, though powerful politically, was not without its challenges. Leofric was notorious for his high taxes, which were often burdensome for the people of his domain. Godiva, unlike many women of her time, is said to have taken a personal interest in the plight of her people, feeling deeply for their suffering and seeking to intervene on their behalf. The most famous and enduring legend surrounding Lady Godiva is the one that involves her infamous ride. According to the story, Godiva pleaded with her husband to reduce the harsh taxes that he had imposed on the people of Coventry. Leofric, in a mocking gesture, told her that he would only do so if she rode naked through the streets of the city. At first, Godiva was horrified by the idea, but eventually she agreed, determined to secure relief for her people. The legend goes that she made the ride through the streets, covered only by her long hair, while the townspeople, showing their respect for her, stayed indoors and averted their eyes in order to allow her to pass without seeing her. The ride has become an enduring symbol of courage and self-sacrifice, with Lady Godiva often celebrated as a feminist icon and an example of how one person's action, no matter how audacious, can stand up to oppression. However, the historical accuracy of this story remains unclear. Some scholars believe the tale may have been exaggerated or even entirely fabricated over time. While there is evidence that Godiva was indeed a historical figure and that she was a philanthropist and political figure of note, the details of her famous ride may have been embellished by later generations. The story itself first appears in written records in the 13th century, several centuries after Godiva's death. Despite the uncertain origins of the legend, Lady Godiva's impact on history is undeniable. Her ride, whether fact or myth, captured the spirit of medieval defiance and became a potent symbol of political activism. Godiva was also known for her charitable works, particularly her patronage of monasteries and her support for the church. She is said to have used her wealth and influence to aid the poor, and her legacy as a benefactor to the church remains part of her historical identity. Her reputation, both as a legendary figure and a historical queen, has been shaped over the centuries. While her ride may be more fiction than fact, it is clear that Lady Godiva was a woman ahead of her time, willing to challenge the powerful forces of her world and act decisively to improve the lives of those around her. She was a woman who used her position and wealth for more than just personal gain. She was a ruler who had compassion for her people and was determined to bring about change, even at great personal cost. Historians often debate the true nature of Godiva's role in medieval politics. Was she simply a noblewoman living within the constraints of her position, or was she an activist, using her influence to challenge injustice and fight for her people? Whatever the answer, her legacy has been shaped by her boldness, her commitment to charity, and her willingness to stand up to the forces of power. Godiva's courage, symbolized by the fabled ride, continues to resonate as a tale of defiance against injustice. As you reflect on Lady Godiva tonight, consider how her story, whether true or not, has endured through the ages as a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and standing up for what is right. In a world that often tried to silence women, Lady Godiva's legacy stands as a testament to the power of defiance and the impact of standing firm in the face of injustice. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen's political manoeuvring. Queen Elizabeth I of England, the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, is one of the most iconic and powerful monarchs in history. Her reign, often referred to as the Elizabethan era, was marked by a time of great change, stability, and prosperity for England. Known as the Virgin Queen for her refusal to marry and the political manoeuvring that came with her status, Elizabeth's leadership was defined by her ability to navigate the complex political landscape of her time, asserting her authority in a male-dominated world, while securing England's place as a major global power. Elizabeth I ascended to the throne in 1558, following the death of her sister, Queen Mary I. Her reign was immediately challenged by several factors, including religious division, threats from powerful foreign enemies like Spain and France, and the ever-present question of marriage and succession. But Elizabeth's intelligence, political acumen, and ability to maintain control over the court allowed her to rise above these challenges and leave an indelible mark on England's history. One of the most defining features of Elizabeth's reign was her handling of religion. The English Reformation had created deep religious divides, with Protestantism firmly established in England during the reign of her father, Henry VIII, and Catholicism being reintroduced under her sister, Mary I. Elizabeth, a Protestant, sought to unify the country by establishing the Elizabethan religious settlement, which established Protestantism as the official religion of England, while maintaining certain Catholic rituals to appease moderate Catholics. The settlement helped to stabilize England after years of religious turmoil, though it was not without controversy. Elizabeth's refusal to marry also played into her political strategies, as her unmarried status allowed her to maintain control over her court and avoid the political entanglements that a royal marriage might bring. Her refusal to marry became a defining feature of her reign. Numerous suitors, including foreign princes and powerful European monarchs, sought her hand, but Elizabeth remained steadfast in her single status. By remaining unmarried, Elizabeth not only preserved her independence, but also avoided the political and dynastic complications that a marriage could bring. The question of her succession, often raised by courtiers and foreign powers, was a constant source of tension, but Elizabeth skillfully navigated this issue, maintaining her authority, without ever committing to a marital alliance. Elizabeth's political manoeuvring also extended to the international stage. Perhaps the most significant threat to her rule came from Spain, particularly with the rise of the Spanish Armada in 1588. The Catholic King Philip II of Spain saw Elizabeth as a heretic and a usurper of the rightful throne, and he sought to eliminate Protestantism in England. The defeat of the Spanish Armada, a major naval conflict, became one of the most celebrated moments of Elizabeth's reign. The victory was a turning point in the Anglo-Spanish War and solidified Elizabeth's reputation as a powerful and capable ruler, able to defend England from the most formidable of foes. Beyond military victories, Elizabeth's reign was also marked by a flourishing of English culture. The Elizabethan era saw the rise of literature, theatre, and the arts. Figures like William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe produced some of the greatest works in English literature, and the arts flourished under the Queen's patronage. Elizabeth was a shrewd and calculating monarch who understood the power of symbolism and propaganda. She carefully crafted her image, portraying herself as the embodiment of England's greatness and a strong, capable leader. Elizabeth's legacy, however, is not without its complexities. Though she achieved great success in securing England's future as a world power, her reign also saw political and religious repression. The persecution of Catholics, the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, and the harsh treatment of Irish rebels all paint a darker side to her rule. Elizabeth was not hesitant to use her power to eliminate threats to her throne, whether they came from within her court or from external enemies. Historians continue to debate Elizabeth's approach to power. Was she simply a brilliant political strategist, or did her personal ambitions drive the decisions she made throughout her reign? Her single-minded pursuit of stability, independence, and national strength sometimes came at a human cost, but Elizabeth's ability to navigate such a complex era of history without losing control of her throne is a testament to her political genius. Her reign solidified the Tudor dynasty and paved the way for the rise of Britain as a global empire. As you reflect on Queen Elizabeth I tonight, think of how she redefined what it meant to be a queen in a male-dominated world. She didn't wield power in the traditional sense of military conquest or marriage alliances. She wielded power through intelligence, strategy, and an unwavering sense of self. Her reign was a balance of maintaining control over her court, expanding England's influence on the world stage, and crafting a national identity that would endure for centuries to come. Queen Blanche of Navarre, the political strategist. Queen Blanche of Navarre, born in 1385, was a woman who knew how to navigate the treacherous waters of medieval politics. Married to Charles the Noble, King of Navarre, her life was filled with political intrigue, conflict, and an unwavering dedication to preserving her family's power. While her reign as queen consort was marked by personal and political struggle, Blanche's legacy as a shrewd political strategist is undeniable. She was not just a queen by title, she was a queen by action, using her intelligence, alliances, and diplomacy to ensure the survival of her kingdom and her children. Blanche's marriage to Charles the Noble was one of political necessity. Charles was a member of the powerful House of Navarre, and their union was meant to strengthen both the kingdom and their familial ties. However, as with many royal marriages, it was not without its challenges. Charles the Noble was a weak ruler, often embroiled in conflicts with France and other European powers, leaving Blanche to take a more active role in the governance of Navarre. When Charles died in 1425, Blanche was left to navigate a complex political landscape with her son, Charles, as the new king. Blanche's role as a mother and regent was vital to her success as a political leader. Her son, Charles the Well-Beloved, was still a child when he inherited the throne, and it was Blanche's political maneuvering that helped to secure his rule. Her early years as regent were marked by constant battles with rival factions and foreign invaders, particularly from France. While many queens would have taken a more passive approach in such a situation, Blanche took command, forging alliances, negotiating with foreign powers, and using her influence to consolidate power for her son. One of Blanche's most notable achievements was her diplomatic handling of Navarre's relationship with France. The Kingdom of Navarre was strategically located between France and Spain, and Blanche used her position to mediate between these two powers. ensuring that Navarre was not consumed by the conflicts that often plagued the region. She worked tirelessly to maintain neutrality, while still pursuing the best interests of her kingdom. Through her careful diplomacy and marriage alliances, she was able to keep Navarre out of the French-Spanish conflict and protect the integrity of her son's reign. Her political acumen extended beyond just foreign affairs. Blanche also worked within her kingdom to ensure stability. She knew that in a time of internal and external unrest, it was crucial to maintain support from the nobility and the clergy. She navigated courtly intrigues, balancing the needs of her kingdom with the ambitions of the powerful nobles. Her ability to maintain control over these often unruly factions was a testament to her skills as a ruler. Blanche's political career was not without its obstacles, and her tenure as regent was marked by conflict. In 1429, she was captured by French forces during a brief war between France and Navarre. Despite her capture, Blanche was not defeated. She managed to secure her release and continued to play a key role in the governance of Navarre. Her resilience in the face of adversity is one of the defining aspects of her legacy. However, despite her many political victories, Blanche's reign was ultimately overshadowed by the rise of her son's adversaries. Charles the Well-Beloved was eventually overthrown in 1461, and the power of the House of Navarre was diminished. Nevertheless, Blanche's legacy lived on in the way she had shaped the future of her kingdom and secured her son's rule, albeit briefly. Her political maneuvering, her sharp intellect, and her ability to navigate the complex web of medieval politics remain a powerful reminder of the impact a queen could have in the 15th century. Historians continue to debate the true extent of Blanche's power and influence. Was she truly a political mastermind? Or was she simply acting out of necessity to protect her son and her kingdom? What is clear, however, is that Blanche of Navarre was a queen who understood the value of strategy, diplomacy, and alliance-making. Her legacy as a political strategist, a mother, and a queen consort is one that has endured, even if her story is not as widely known as some of her contemporaries. As you reflect on Queen Blanche tonight, think of her strength in the face of adversity, her ability to maintain her power through cunning and diplomacy, and her unwavering devotion to her son's reign. She may not have had the public grandeur or military victories of other queens, but her legacy as a skilled political leader continues to be celebrated even centuries after her death. Margaret I of Denmark, the woman who united Scandinavia. Margaret I of Denmark is a name that resonates through Scandinavian history, not because of military conquests or grand titles, but because of her extraordinary political skill and vision for unifying the fractured kingdoms of Scandinavia. Born in 1353, Margaret was the daughter of King Valdemar IV of Denmark, and was thrust into a turbulent political landscape from an early age. While her path to power was initially shaped by family politics and strategic marriages, it was her exceptional leadership that ultimately united Denmark, Norway, and Sweden under a single crown, an achievement that few women in history have matched. Margaret's early life was marked by the challenges of the medieval political system. The death of her father in 1375 left Denmark vulnerable to foreign influence, and Margaret's future marriage to King Håkon VI of Norway solidified an alliance that would shape her future. Their marriage in 1363 brought her closer to the thrones of both Denmark and Norway, but it was her subsequent widowhood that set the stage for her eventual rise to power. Upon the death of her husband in 1380, Margaret found herself as the mother of the young King Olaf II of Norway, and it was through him that she would eventually claim a central role in Scandinavian politics. Margaret's reign began not as a ruler in her own right, but as a regent for her son. However, her political acumen quickly became apparent, and she seized opportunities to strengthen her influence. When Olaf died unexpectedly in 1387, Margaret, despite not being directly in line for the throne, was able to secure the throne of Norway for herself. She became the ruling monarch of Norway, leveraging her power through diplomacy and alliances rather than military force. and she managed to further her ambitions by using the young Swedish royal family to solidify her grip on power. In 1397, Margaret achieved one of her most remarkable successes, uniting the kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden under the Kalmar Union. This union, named after the city of Kalmar in Sweden, placed all three kingdoms under the rule of a single monarch. Margaret's diplomatic skills were key to this accomplishment, as she skillfully negotiated with powerful nobles and leaders within each kingdom, navigating complex familial, political, and cultural divides. Through her leadership, Margaret was able to maintain peace between the often warring nations of Scandinavia and set the stage for a period of relative stability in the region. Despite her success, Margaret's reign was not without challenges. Her control over Sweden, in particular, was tenuous, as the Swedish nobility remained resistant to her authority. Over time, Margaret's diplomatic successes were marred by opposition from Swedish factions who were unwilling to be ruled by a Danish monarch. While Margaret worked tirelessly to quell rebellion, her ability to maintain control of Sweden became increasingly difficult, and by the time of her death in 1412, the unity of the Kalmar Union had begun to unravel. However, Margaret's legacy as the unifier of Scandinavia has endured. Her achievements were built on a foundation of political intelligence, careful negotiation, and the ability to forge alliances and maintain peace. Margaret's reign represents one of the few instances in history where a woman not only ruled as a monarch, but also brought together multiple kingdoms under her leadership, an accomplishment that is remarkable not only for its rarity but for the relative stability it brought to the region during a time of immense political volatility. Historians still debate whether Margaret's union of Scandinavia was a success in the long term, given that it eventually fractured after her death. Was her achievement the result of careful diplomacy, or was it a product of temporary political circumstances? Some argue that Margaret's success was based on her ability to leverage the division and discontent between the Scandinavian kingdoms, while others suggest that her reign laid the groundwork for future Nordic cooperation, despite the challenges that arose after her death. As you think about Margaret I tonight, reflect on how a woman, often confined to the margins of medieval politics, was able to accomplish something few could have imagined. She showed that leadership does not require brute force or military conquest. Sometimes, the most effective rulers are those who can bring people together through diplomacy, intelligence, and vision. Margaret's story is a reminder that true power often comes from the ability to shape the future, even in the face of resistance and adversity. Queen Isabella of Castile, the religious zealot. Queen Isabella I of Castile, whose reign in the late 15th century helped shape the future of Spain and the New World, was one of the most powerful and influential monarchs in European history. Her rule, alongside her husband Ferdinand II of Aragon, is often remembered for the unification of Spain and the establishment of Catholic dominance over the Iberian Peninsula. However, Isabella's legacy is also marked by religious zealotry, with her most controversial act being the initiation of the Spanish Inquisition, a period of intense religious persecution that would define much of her reign. Born in 1451, Isabella was the daughter of King John II of Castile. Her early life was one of political uncertainty, as the throne of Castile was embroiled in conflict. When she ascended to the throne in 1474 after the death of her half-brother, King Henry IV, Isabella's determination to unify Spain under one Catholic monarchy became the central focus of her reign. Her marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon in 1469 united the two most powerful kingdoms on the Iberian Peninsula, marking the beginning of the Spanish unification process. The marriage, although politically motivated, was deeply personal, and the couple's close relationship would be a significant factor in their success in consolidating power. Isabella and Ferdinand's reign was marked by aggressive campaigns to reclaim Spanish territory from Muslim rule, culminating in the conquest of Granada in 1492, the last Muslim stronghold on the Iberian Peninsula. The fall of Granada marked the completion of the Reconquista, a centuries-long effort to expel Muslims from Spain. The victory was not just a military triumph, but also a symbolic moment in Isabella's reign, reinforcing her vision of Spain as a unified Catholic state. It was also the beginning of a new era for Spain, as the newly united kingdom would soon embark on global exploration and colonization. However, Isabella's fervent Catholicism led to one of the most controversial and dark chapters of her reign, the establishment of the Spanish Inquisition in 1478. The Inquisition was designed to root out heresy and force the conversion of non-Catholic populations, including Jews and Muslims, to Christianity. Isabella and Ferdinand sought to enforce religious homogeneity in their kingdom, and under their rule, thousands of Jews and Muslims were forced to convert to Christianity or face expulsion. The most tragic and brutal aspect of the Inquisition was the systematic torture and execution of those accused of heresy. The inquisitors sought to eliminate all perceived threats to the Catholic faith, and many innocent people were subjected to horrific trials and executions. While Isabella believed she was protecting the soul of Spain and ensuring its spiritual purity, the Spanish Inquisition left a lasting stain on her reign and the future of Spanish religious tolerance. Isabella's religious zeal did not stop with the Inquisition. In 1492, the same year as the fall of Granada, Isabella issued the Alhambra Decree, which ordered the expulsion of all Jews from Spain. This decree resulted in the forced exile of hundreds of thousands of Jews, many of whom had lived in Spain for centuries. While some Jews were able to convert to Christianity and remain in the country, many were either killed or driven to other parts of Europe, contributing to a diaspora that would have far-reaching consequences for centuries. Isabella's decision to expel the Jews is still a point of debate, with some historians arguing that her actions weakened Spain economically, as the Jewish community had been a significant part of the country's trade and finance systems. Despite her religious policies, Isabella's reign was also marked by significant cultural and economic achievements. She was a patron of the arts and education, and played a pivotal role in the establishment of the Spanish Empire. One of her most famous acts was sponsoring Christopher Columbus's voyages to the New World. In 1492, Isabella and Ferdinand agreed to fund Columbus's expedition, leading to the discovery of the Americas and the beginning of Spain's colonial empire. This moment would change the course of history, making Spain one of the most powerful and wealthy nations in the world for centuries. Isabella's legacy is one of complexity. She was a queen who unified Spain and laid the foundation for its future greatness. But she was also a monarch whose religious intolerance and actions during the Inquisition left a dark legacy. Historians continue to debate her motivations and actions. Was she a devout Catholic who acted out of a genuine desire to protect her kingdom, or was she a political ruler who sought to consolidate her power at the expense of religious minorities? Regardless of the interpretation, Isabella's reign marked a turning point in European and world history, and her actions shaped the future of Spain and its empire. As you reflect on Queen Isabella tonight, think of the balance between ambition and faith, political power and religious zealotry. Isabella was a queen who sought to create a united, powerful Spain, but whose methods left a controversial legacy. Her reign is a reminder that power, when wielded in the name of faith or national pride, can have both profound positive impacts and lasting negative consequences. Empress Theodora, the power behind the throne. Empress Theodora of Byzantium, often regarded as one of the most influential women in medieval history, was a woman whose rise to power defied the expectations of her time. Born into a humble family around 500 CE, Theodora's early life was filled with hardship. Her father was a bear trainer, and her mother was a dancer, both occupations far removed from the wealth and prestige that would later surround her. Despite these humble beginnings, Theodora's extraordinary intelligence, political acumen, and unmatched resilience would propel her to the heights of imperial power. As the wife of Emperor Justinian I, she was not only an empress consort but also the true co-ruler of the Byzantine Empire. Theodora's early years were spent in Constantinople, where she worked as an actress and, according to some accounts, was involved in more controversial professions. These early years, often viewed with disdain by historians and contemporary critics, were instrumental in shaping Theodora's character. She learned the ways of the world and honed her ability to navigate the complex, often dangerous politics of the Byzantine court. It was during this period that she caught the eye of Justinian, who was captivated by her beauty, intelligence, and spirit. When Justinian ascended to the throne in 527, Theodora was crowned empress, but her role in the empire was far more complex than that of a typical queen consort. From the outset of their marriage, Justinian and Theodora formed a powerful partnership. Theodora was deeply involved in the decision-making process, often guiding her husband on matters of policy and governance. Her political influence was unmatched, and she was known to be a sharp strategist who understood the intricacies of Byzantine politics. One of Theodora's most significant contributions to the Byzantine Empire came during the Nika riots of 532. The riots, which began as a dispute among chariot racing factions, quickly escalated into a full-scale rebellion against Justinian's rule. As the riots raged through Constantinople, Justinian was urged by his advisors to flee the city, but it was Theodora, with her unyielding resolve, who convinced her husband to stay and fight. Theodora famously declared, "The royal purple is the noblest shroud," a statement that solidified her determination to confront the rebellion. With her support, Justinian held his ground, and his forces eventually crushed the rebellion, securing his reign. This episode not only demonstrated Theodora's bravery, but also her ability to wield power at a critical moment. Beyond her role in times of crisis, Theodora was also known for her reformist policies. She championed the rights of women in the Byzantine Empire, advocating for laws that improved the status of women in marriage, divorce, and inheritance. One of her most notable reforms was her advocacy for the protection of women from forced prostitution. She established safe houses for women who had been victims of sexual exploitation, and her reforms laid the foundation for greater protections for women in the Byzantine legal system. These reforms were groundbreaking, especially in a time when women had little legal standing. Theodora was also instrumental in the development of the Byzantine Church. She played a key role in the establishment of the Chalcedonian Creed, which helped define the theological direction of the Church and solidified her influence in religious matters. Her support of the Orthodox faith was unwavering, and she used her position to protect the Church from internal and external threats. Theodora's ability to balance her political, religious, and social responsibilities made her one of the most powerful women in history. Despite her many achievements, Theodora's reign was not without its detractors. Some critics saw her as manipulative and ruthless, particularly when it came to eliminating those who opposed her or Justinian's policies. Her political opponents were often silenced through exile or death, and her rise to power was not without controversy. However, many historians argue that Theodora's actions were necessary to maintain the stability of the empire and to ensure her husband's continued rule. Theodora, like many powerful women, was judged by a different standard than her male counterparts, and her legacy has been shaped by both admiration and criticism. Theodora's death in 548 marked the end of an era for the Byzantine Empire. After her passing, Justinian was never quite the same, and the empire slowly began to decline. However, Theodora's influence continued to be felt for generations. She had helped solidify Justinian's rule, ensured the stability of the empire, and left behind a legacy of reform and empowerment for women. Historians continue to debate Theodora's legacy. Was she a ruthless power broker, or was she a woman who used her position to advocate for justice and reform in a world that was not kind to women? Was she truly a co-ruler with Justinian, or was her role as empress consort exaggerated by later generations? While the answers to these questions may vary, what remains certain is that Theodora was a remarkable figure who shaped the Byzantine Empire in ways that few women in history have. As you reflect on Theodora tonight, think of the strength it took for her to rise from humble beginnings to become one of the most powerful women in history. Her legacy, shaped by both her political acumen and her humanitarian efforts, shows us that true power is not always about physical dominance or military conquest. It is often found in the ability to shape laws, influence political change, and stand firm in the face of adversity. Catherine de' Medici, the Queen of Intrigue. Catherine de' Medici, born in 1519 to the powerful Medici family of Florence, is a figure whose name has become synonymous with political cunning, ambition, and intrigue. Though often remembered as a ruthless and calculating queen, Catherine's legacy is more complex than her reputation suggests. As the wife of King Henry II of France and mother to 3 French kings, Catherine played a pivotal role in shaping French politics during one of the most tumultuous periods in the country's history. Her influence over the French throne spanned decades, and her ability to navigate the dangerous waters of court politics makes her one of the most fascinating women in history. Catherine's early life was marked by tragedy and instability. Orphaned as a child, she was raised by relatives in the Medici court before being married off to Henry II, the future King of France, in a politically motivated union. When Henry ascended the throne in 1547, Catherine became queen consort, but her role was initially limited by the presence of her husband's powerful mistresses, particularly Diane de Poitiers, who wielded significant influence at court. Despite her husband's affection for Diane, Catherine was no passive queen. She quickly began to use her sharp intellect and political acumen to navigate the complex political landscape of the French court. Catherine's most significant political role began after the sudden death of Henry II in 1559. With her sons Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III ascending to the throne, Catherine became the de facto ruler of France. At a time when France was embroiled in religious and political turmoil, Catherine worked tirelessly to maintain her family's hold on power. Her reign coincided with the Wars of Religion, a bloody conflict between French Catholics and Huguenots, Protestants, which threatened to tear the country apart. As regent for her young sons, Catherine had to navigate the ever-shifting allegiances of the French nobility and maintain a delicate balance between the two factions. One of Catherine's most controversial decisions during this time was her role in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572. In the midst of escalating tensions between Catholics and Huguenots, Catherine ordered the massacre of thousands of Huguenot Protestants in Paris, a decision that has stained her legacy for centuries. The massacre, which began as a targeted attack on Protestant leaders, spread throughout France, leaving hundreds of thousands dead. While Catherine's exact role in the massacre remains a subject of debate, it is clear that she was deeply involved in orchestrating the bloodshed. To some, Catherine's actions were an attempt to maintain order and protect the French throne. To others, she was a ruthless and manipulative queen, willing to use any means necessary to secure her family's power. Despite her ruthless reputation, Catherine was also known for her intelligence, diplomacy, and patronage of the arts. She played a key role in the development of French culture, supporting the Renaissance movement in France, and fostering the growth of French literature, art, and architecture. She also worked to stabilize the French economy, though the constant religious conflict often overshadowed her efforts. Catherine was a queen who ruled not with an iron fist, but with subtlety, using political marriages, alliances, and manipulation to keep her enemies at bay and maintain her family's grip on power. Catherine's later years were marked by her growing frustration with her son's inability to rule effectively. Francis II died young, and Charles IX's reign was marred by his inability to quell the religious violence in the country. Henry III, her final son to rule, was weak and indecisive, leaving Catherine to continue managing the affairs of the state in her old age. By the time of her death in 1589, Catherine had become a symbol of power, determination, and the toll that unrelenting ambition could take on a person. Historians continue to debate Catherine de' Medici's legacy. Was she a master tactician who played a central role in the survival of her family and the preservation of the French monarchy? Or was she a queen who, through her ambition, sacrificed countless lives for political gain? Some see her as a victim of circumstance, a woman who was forced to navigate a male-dominated world of politics, while others view her as a power-hungry ruler whose actions were often driven by a desire for control. What is clear is that Catherine de' Medici was one of the most politically astute and influential queens in European history. Her reign was marked by intrigue, manipulation, and strategic alliances, and her impact on the French throne cannot be overstated. Though her reputation has often been overshadowed by the darker aspects of her rule, Catherine's ability to navigate the complexities of the French court and maintain her family's power is a testament to her political genius. As you reflect on Catherine tonight, consider the delicate balance she maintained between power and pragmatism, her ability to survive in a world of political violence, and her enduring legacy as one of history's most fascinating and complex queens. Sweet dreams.